There will always be haters in our lives, but God's love will overtake them. New York best-selling author Rebecca Alonzo never felt safe as a child. In 1969, her father Robert Nichols moved to Sellerstown, North Carolina to serve as a pastor. There he found a small community eager to welcome him, with one exception. Glaring at him from pew number 7 was a man obsessed with controlling the church. Determined to get rid of anyone who stood in his way, he unleashed a plan of terror that was more devastating and violent than the Nichols family could have ever imagined. This is her story. This is today's Nashville. This is Faith. Rebecca, thank you for sitting down with me this morning. Your story, wow. I read it when it first came out, just reread it, and I'm telling you, it's powerful. And I stop and think about everything that you've gone through. Let's talk about it from the very beginning.
Thank you. Yes, well, it began with my mom and dad being evangelists and being asked to come and speak at a church in North Carolina back in the 60s. And then they were asked to stay on and pastor the church because they did not have a pastor at that time. So I was born the following spring, and so new family, new church, new community, new pastorship, and my mom and dad were just happy as they could be. And it started with around 12 people in the church, and my mom and dad would just go out and knock on doors and invite people to church on Sunday mornings, and everyone welcomed my mom and dad into this little
It was like a beautiful
community.
Love story, wasn't it?
Beautiful love story. My mom and dad loved God, they loved people, and this little church had about 12 people in it, and then it grew to over 100 people within a year. And it was out in the middle of farming community. So it was big church growth in a short amount of time. And I was, like I said, I was born during that time. 5 years later, my brother Daniel was born. And so this church became our church family, but also best friends, because our family, our blood family, was over 700 miles away in Alabama and Louisiana, and we were in North Carolina at this time. So it was just an amazing time growing up as a little girl in a church where everybody, just loved you, and a lot of attention, good and bad, because I could never get away with anything as a preacher's kid. But, just really felt like that's where God had called my mom and dad. And my dad was ex-military, and so when a soldier is called to a post, they stay there until the, one in charge tells them to leave, and they really felt like God had called them there. So during this time, about a year and a half into pastoring, there was a man that came to our church, and he sat in pew number 7 every Sunday. And he had kind of been running that community, the church, and his name was Mr. Watts. He had a little chat with my dad and said, you're doing things differently than we do around here. You need to go on back to Alabama where you came from. And so my dad said, you know what, I feel like God's called us here. And so we're going to set up order. We're going to have an elder board. We're going to run things the way that God tells us to, and not the way that you're telling us to. And that just enraged this man, Mr. Watts. He was in his 60s. He was a county commissioner. He was a millionaire. He had a lot of control, a lot of money. My 30-something-year-old, dad coming in, just trying to set up order and love people and minister to that community. And then he, came in up against this man that did not want to give up his self-appointed position of power. He was like a godfather type figure in that community. So it was just a battle began, and it began 5 years of terrorism at the hands of Mr. Watts.
It's an incredible story. Let's talk about some of the terror that you experienced.
Well, it began with threatening letters. And one of them read, because we lived in this little town called Sellerstown, "You will leave Sellerstown walking, crawling, dead or alive." So those letters began to come in the mail. And then the harassing phone calls, 30 to 60 a day, a lot of them at night. because, they were just trying to wear us down. And so we would call the police, and everybody knew who was behind it. Not only did Mr. Watts sit in pew number 7 every Sunday in church, but he lived across the street from our house. So he could look out his window, see if we were at home, see if we were out of town. He would hire ex-cons that couldn't get a job, and he would just pay them $20 every time they would call our house and hang up, or he would pay them to break into our home when we were on vacation. It escalated to drive-by shootings, so they would slash our tires, cut our phone lines, and then drive by our house and just riddle our house with bullets. So by the time I was 4 years old, I had bullets flying past my head. I'm learning ABCs and how to ride a bike and how to also, when you hear a gunshot, get down. It was the worst of times and the best of times is the way I try to describe it to people, because the church was growing. My mom and dad were doing great, except for this man, Mr. Watts, the only disgruntled person in the community, but the most powerful person in the community.
And you had the police couldn't catch him. And I read this one, your brother was born. I might be getting ahead.
No, you're...
But somebody came by and started shooting, and they thought your brother might have not survived it.
Right. Well, it escalated from all the other things to bombings, and that's what you're referring to, was that this man began putting dynamite bombs around our church and around the home. And one of the bombs went off by my parents' window, which is where my baby brother was sleeping.
And what happened then?
And so my mother just knew. She's like, I can't even go check on him. She's like, I know Danny is dead, because that bomb blew out 3 windows of their room. And she would teach me, she would read Psalms 91 to me at night. And it talks about how God will cover you with his feathers. And not one piece of glass or wood was on my brother.
So let's talk about, all this is going around. I mean, it's just happening nonstop. Was there any time that was just calm?
Yes, he would space it out. Mr. Watts would space out the attacks. So 3 months would go by and we would think, oh, he's, given up, or he sees, when the FBI got involved and the ATF agents, and they put mobile units in the cornfields behind our house, and they would, be out there at night trying to catch these guys. He would lay off and go low and get kind of quiet, and we would think he had given up, because it was local, state, and federal agents involved in trying to catch these guys.
And they couldn't catch them.
For 2.5 years, the bombings went off. There were 10 bombings in 2.5 years. And not only were we terrorized, but that community heard those bombs 3 miles down the road. They were huge explosions.
That's unbelievable. So after the bombings, how did your dad and your mother, how did they handle all this? Because I know I probably would have just said, let's pack up and leave.
Right. My mom, and dad, obviously, they talked about that. And at first, my dad wanted to stay and my mom wanted to leave. And then it flipped, and my mom wanted to stay and my dad wanted to leave, because he felt responsible for his wife and his 2 children. But we would go stay out at a farm, and stay at a friend's farm, at night, just to be safe sometimes. But my mother said, if we leave, he will hunt us down.
And then it was Easter. The Easter weekend was something that was unbelievable, and we're going to talk about it when we come back.